There's been a lot of missing in action in this week's podcast. Where is the Scottish Government and the SNP when an energy supplier, Octopus, calls for zonal pricing that would give Scotland the cheapest energy in Europe? They're kind of missing in action. We talk about the latest proposals by Rachel Reeves, which looks like a bonfire of the regulations on the banking sector, which kind of prompted all the chaos post 2008. Is that really going to be such a great advance? And back to Israel and Palestine, some shocking admissions really about the connections between the current Labour government and trips to Israel that were not declared by MPs. That and more news about the July 19th march. Those are the headlines. Now for the podcast.
Well, hi folks, and welcome to this week's Lesley Riddoch podcast. It's been a scorcher. How have you fared in the heat, Miss Riddoch?
Well, I thought you were going to extrapolate there because, I mean, any scorchio we had here, you were Scorchio plus in Greece.
Oh, we were definitely Scorchio. I was quite, every morning you woke up to another bulletin from the Hellenic weather people saying, be aware, do not die. We're sick of people going up the, Parthenon and passing out. So, behave yourselves.
Mm. And did you find it too much? I've got to say, my ideas of all of this now, plus your actual kind of climate change and everything, it just feels like going abroad like this and a ritualistic 2 weeks is kind of, you've got children, which makes a difference, right?
But it is compulsory.
When we were young, somebody's got to do this, right? We got hauled to Wick for 2 weeks. And then a road junction in Banffshire for 2 weeks. And that was our holidays. And that probably shaped me because that, you got to know Scotland extremely well. I take it your wee ones are not so keen on 4 weeks in Butte.
Well, they quite enjoy going to Butte, certainly. And they like running around and they are immune to the cold. I mean, my daughter, of course, can be in the sea skipping about and swimming when everybody else is in wellies and an iron jumper. But it was extremely hot, and me and the tinier of the two tiny Thompsons walked up to the Acropolis of Lindos in something like 33, 34 degree heat. Obviously well hydrated, and had to stop off and buy him a new hat because he'd lost his hat on the way, and an ice cream halfway along, and keeping in the shade. It was probably only about a 20-minute walk, but it was absolutely baking. And of course you had Michael Mosley-esque reports going around the back of your mind, but it was well worth the hike. And of course he was leaping about, and I was like, this is not a parkour exercise here, pal, keep your energy for the way back down. But it was a lot of fun, and we came back yesterday. We were supposed to be in Edinburgh at 2 o'clock, at midnight rather, and it was more like 2:30 by the time EasyJet had faffed her out with all their delays. And of course Edinburgh's been in the news, or there's certainly a number of articles over the last week about various people coming back into Edinburgh Airport and being very miffed about how grubby it was. I don't think it looked any dirtier than any other dirty airport. It was your usual uphill and down dale because you're in a budget carrier, so that's steps rather than an air bridge, and you have to climb all the way up and then climb all the way back down again till you finally get to baggage reclaim. And there was one kind of half-hearted, we're sorry about the delay in your baggage, but this is due to some other buggers, and it's nothing to do with Edinburgh Airport, which seemed to be their main press line. And it was third-party baggage handlers that took too long to get your bags out, but it was more than half an hour or something to get the bags. But my pet peeve, as always, is people who allow their children to go next to the baggage carousel. I mean, in the 80s, when I were a lad, you would have got scalped something senseless if you'd gone anywhere close to the baggage carousel, never mind standing right next to it, in case you get your arm lopped off. And every single person stood right next to the carousel, so you couldn't see anything anywhere. And I thought, I'm just looking forward to my bags coming out and accidentally boofing you with my case because you're so thick that you're
Fraser. so you have not completely chilled in your holiday then.
I don't know, I think you used to have the old there used to be a bit of a barrier or kind of a painted line that you didn't cross so that people could see. But anyway, it was all very enjoyable. A lovely 2 weeks away, and don't suppose anything has happened in my absence. I see the First Minister is now welcoming kneecap. So again, getting the...
Yeah, you said that. Where was that? I couldn't see that
he was in
anywhere.
hospital announcing the new hospital at home stuff in Falkirk. And he said he welcomed kneecap after they'd criticised him in their Glasgow gig. But then, of course, quite rightly pivoted onto the message that they're sending rather than the controversy surrounding them. But he could have done that the first time, and then they wouldn't have had thousands of people at a concert shouting that he wasn't, the world's greatest person.
Yeah, well, I mean, they've just announced a tour with a huge event at the Hydro. I'm not quite sure where. The tickets are on sale at 10 a.m. tomorrow morning. So I imagine they're all they're all gone probably already. And I wouldn't have thought that, round robin will let him escape their ire, actually, So, yeah, good try.
Yeah. But I think the news of the week was zonal pricing.
It was to me, but this part of the thing was not to anyone else. And this is kind of, I don't know, sometimes I just think I live in a kind of weird bubble, where energy stuff really hits me because it's the future for Scotland. It's our total present and future. And it's weird how little interest there is. Just before we get on to the zonal pricing, I noticed, for example, that the Welsh government have just announced that they are they bought and are going to operate 2 wind farms, government-owned, all profits generated, reinvested in Welsh communities and public services. It looks like they haven't gone round this problem that they actually still have to send it into the grid. But, that's a massive step forward for Wales. And why are we not doing that? So this is to me, this is the same with the zonal pricing thing, because there was a little mention, I can't remember now, let me think, I kind of wrote this column last Tuesday, so it was probably last weekend, about, Ed Miliband had been swithering for a while about this idea of zonal pricing. So you basically pay according to the average price of the energy that's generated where you are. And so since 113% of Scottish energy is renewables, most of the time we would be actually paying a lower rate because we haven't got so much dependence on that problematic gas within our energy mix. So there's a lot of people have got issues with zonal pricing, but Greg Jackson, the head of Octopus Energy, doesn't, and had basically asserted, and nobody seemed to be contradicting this, that if zonal pricing was introduced and Scotland was a zone, we would have, he thinks, the lowest electricity prices in Europe, which is a bit of a claim because, sometimes I think people ignore the Nordics who have pretty low pricing for all sorts of other reasons. But anyway, that's still quite a result. That would be low for business users, which would encourage north. The same sort of movement of industry that happened within, the Industrial Revolution a long time ago, when industry had to move to where the energy was. And in fact, if you do look across Europe and the Nordics, that happened before much of this, when hydro energy encouraged a lot of businesses to go to the rivers in Norway because that's where their hydro was producing power. So the argument is essentially the same. And then you don't need, fundamentally, you could move on to an argument to say that you don't need quite as much wires, fandangos, pylons and cables, because the south of England should be encouraged to be producing its own energy. So anyway, there's all of this argument going on. And what struck me as amazing about it was, so Ed Miliband came out and went, I don't think so. And the Daily Mail, of all people, had a headline which was basically reading, and she said, shuffling her various bits of stuff in front of her, Ed Miliband abandons zonal electricity pricing, which would charge people in southern England more for power than Scots. So there it is right there. And the speculation was simply that, the Labour Party is scared of a backlash from England at the idea that Scots who are generating green energy actually pay less for it. He'd also got heavily lobbied, like they are constantly doing, by the big energy producers that don't want this to happen, because even the renewable guys benefit at the moment from the fact they get the same price for their energy as gas, which is kind of crazy, but gives them something in their pocket, and they say that helps them invest. But I mean, if you're this First Minister of Scotland or the leader of the Greens, would you not be out shrieking from the rooftops that this is a slap in the face to Scotland from Westminster? And there just wasn't.
Well, you would think. I mean, it's entirely muted. I mean, I don't really know what the position is from the SNP. I mean, they basically seem to be against zonal pricing, but in a very kind of timid and undefined way. But even if you weren't for zonal pricing in of itself, and you're concerned about the potential impact that might have on investment, it was an ideal opportunity to, as Ian McWhirter says, have some political propaganda. I mean, we should have been having, speech after speech after speech, announcements all over the place. We've met our targets. We've got, huge amounts of surplus of energy. Wind farm operators are currently getting 2.7 billion a year to shut off. And what we need to do is actually redistribute energy usage, not redistribute energy.
Yep. And can I just say, however, the Ian McWhirter piece in the Times starts, Lesley Riddoch is fed up. And basically it's sort of a fairly unapologetic, complete rip-off of my column, as it were, in the Times. But it's fair enough, because, it's reaching a different audience in the Times. And he's sort of saying, he's quoting me as saying, where's the outcry from the SNP or Greens? And he kind of explores the same, and says this, surely this was a slam dunk for a nationalist party, which always claims that Scots were robbed of the last energy bonanza in the North Sea. Well, even if you thought it was a bad idea and you were just mixing it, there's a thought you could wake up and do that. But actually, if someone is asserting the idea that we could have the cheapest energy costs in Europe, wouldn't you be just out front and centre trying to make sure that, you could grab that one? And that, together with even the Welsh putting up, their own government-owned wind farms, it just feels like our guys are freaking asleep on the job. I'll grant you the other thing is there are a few people that are coming back in and saying, well, actually, the zonal energy thing is not so great. And I'll grant you there's an argument in there to be had. Part of it is that when you look at the overall energy price, not all of it is about the cost is not all about the transmission, which is where we would succeed, or we would have a better chance of getting lower prices. And I'll give you that there's that within it. But still, that's the argument you have once you've made this a debate in the open, where there's at least one side saying, how brilliant would it be if we could revolutionise Scotland? And I cannot believe that there is nobody in the SNP who doesn't see the possibilities of this. Is everyone in the Scottish government getting so heavily, lobbied by everybody, and has just become so blinking timid, despite what you're saying is his wee U-turn on kneecap, but I'll sort of wait to see, I still hardly believe that. But it's as if the instincts are, that's not something somebody in a big sofa with a big slipper on would think is a good idea. I think we'll let that one go by. And this is not enough.
It's nowhere near enough. And it's just a complete lack of ability to seize and make political capital out of something that is, really current. And, frankly, if it's going to hamper development in Scotland, then that would be due to market force economics, because we're obviously in surplus already. So, you can't have it both ways. And,
we did have a special podcast, and actually the guys in Energy Scotland are interesting on this, in that they spend a lot of time debating within themselves all these aspects. Sometimes I think they could be doing more talking to everybody else than perfecting the argument amongst themselves. But still, that's a communications kind of fetish. But there is the argument, some say, that you do need some, like, for example, there's an argument about a new gas-powered station at Peterhead. Strangely, some supporters of renewable energy say that's needed to basically stabilise the grid in Scotland, because at the moment we do get some coming, an exchange of energy we are by far an exporter of energy at renewables, but we take back in some gas. So, if we were thinking of how to have a stable system in the future on our own, we do need some sort of base load. We could be getting that maybe from tidal, but we ain't there yet. So the thing is, there is arguments to be had about this, and I'm sure how I've articulated this will be wrong because I'm not an expert in this. And that's why I really encourage these guys to get in, learn how to speak simply about a complex thing, and make this an argument for Scotland. Because this should be, people, when you think of the detailed stuff that especially yesers have got their heads around over the last 10 years, it is unbelievable the complex systems that people have had to unravel. And there is not a system in Britain that isn't unduly complex because most of it has been privatised within a freaking inch of its life. And then has, just for example, broadband. Does anyone remember the nonsense of the broadband where you had to prove 120 people in your community wanted broadband before you got the shonkiest version of it sort of piped in? Then there was there was competition about who would deliver to which postcode and all this sort of nonsense. And when I was in the Western Isles thing, I was speaking to the Faroese folk who once again just reminded me that tiny little Faroes with their devolved government just set up a government-owned company and ordered them to fix mobile broadband to every house without exception in the Faroes. The end. So it's kind of like we've got terribly used to everything being unbelievably complicated. And here we are again. We've got to get our heads around energy because it is the future. And at the same time, keep this simple truth that we are that should be laughing. We should be laughing with the amount of renewable energy we've got. And we are, until we are in a situation where the people that have got the most renewable energy are paying the lowest bills in Europe, until that moment, this is a broken system the Scottish government should be upset about. And if they're not upset about it, it needs somebody else who will.
Completely. I've been listening to the new book Original Sin about the cover-up in Joe Biden's presidency, and then the cover-up in the campaign about just how underpowered he was. And a lot of that comes down to the fact that, that there's zero leadership. You've got a whole bundle of officials trying to kind of run the government in secret and kind of put him out there as and when. It means that various different people within the outfit have different opinions on different things, and there's no leader cutting through it. There is no political leadership saying, we're doing this, we're not doing that. And we're not seeing any political leadership on these matters at all. It's just constant drift with no clear messaging. And I think it's going to have a real negative impact on the SNP government as we move forward.
Indeed. I mean, I should say to everybody, thank you so much for the contributions to the Finland crowdfunder, because we're almost there on 2 films. We've got the money now for the Finland film, so tickets booked. We're off in September. But the second, another little tranche of money was to go and make a film at the request of an awful lot of people in the Highlands about the total overload there, discussed in the last podcast. So that too is happening, and that's tremendous. But I don't know what, there's another big meeting they're having August the 12th. It's probably now up to 70 community councils in the Highlands that probably represents half the population, who are kind of basically going to confront the politicians, SNP and Labour in the main. Labour, obviously, the Westminster government that's pushing through the massive extraction of wind energy to the south of England, let's be blunt. Scottish government, the guys in charge of planning, who are rubber stamping this and letting it all happen. So, and I know as soon as I've said this, anyone listening in Skye is going to say, what about us? In the Western Isles will be saying that. In Angus, everybody basically outside the Central Belt, and I'm sorry because I keep forgetting the borders too, everyone except the Central Belt is sitting with this kind of issue. And if you look in the English press, you'll see all sorts of similar stuff. There's wind turbines going up in Bronte country, which of course has got the Guardian in a flap. And you do look at some of it and think, well, it's a bit precious, this. But the point is, if only any of this was actually to let those people, and there is a sort of system to have slightly lower tariffs for people living very close to wind farms. I haven't unravelled it yet, but I see that it is being proposed. But this needs much, this is a totally different system that we need. And we're basically pushing ahead at the moment. No local democracy, so you can have 100% objection to something. It doesn't mean anything. And that is so dangerous for the SNP, for the Scottish Government, devolution. If you're just not paying any, if even the SNP is paying no attention to its own people, and differentiating itself from the drive that's coming from Westminster to just blindly stick all the hardware in the Highlands and the borders, to let that be the sacrifice zone for the south of England, that's a reform vote right in the bag right there.
Yeah. As that protest vote just comes wanging in, what are we getting out of it? I suppose we're back to some of your previous thoughts about grabbiness, but you've got this huge amount of industrial infrastructure whacked up next to you, which you're getting absolutely zero benefit.
And actually, I don't know if you noticed, but there's been a number of polls done. Jeremy Corbyn still hasn't come out, as far as I know, to say, he's completely in this party that Zara Sultana has set up, the Lefty Party. But everybody's been cheerfully polling away on it. And it seems now that it's polling at 15% before he's even he's joined, right? And there's interesting analysis on that, saying that, funnily enough, that might actually not hurt Labour too much, because anyone who's likely to vote for Jeremy Corbyn is possibly already peeled off to independents and the Gaza people that stood at the last election, or, weirdly, the Lib Dems. I mean, how you could sort of think there's a choice between Jeremy Corbyn and the Lib Dems beats me, but the Greens, they're predicting, could really be hurt by this. And, there's some of the same argument here, because the Greens are going through a leadership contest at the moment. And, it's not at all clear who, what big issues there are at the midst of it. Seems to be quite a lot of personality stuff going on. You've been having a look at that, haven't you?
Well, it seems to be almost entirely personality driven. Obviously, Patrick Harvey has announced that he's not going to seek re-election after his 17 years as party co-leader. So the runners and riders seem to be Ross Greer, Lorna Strater and Gillian Mackay, although it's not clear whether Gillian's going to put herself forward. I see Ross is obviously out in front and is operating a much better media operation, but coming up with kind of things that are a bit shallow, perhaps. I mean, he's calling again for universal public transport, free bus transport for everybody in Scotland. But I mean, as far as I can tell, that's been a Green policy, since I was a boy. Certainly was a policy, I'm sure, in the 2007, if not definitely the 2011 Scottish parliamentary election. And coming out with sort of slightly half-baked things, like calling on John Swinney to de-risk the potential whisky tariffs from a Trump government by focusing on Canada. And you think, okay, that sounds, for half a second, you think, oh, that sounds like a good idea. We've got to make sure that, we look at alternative marketplaces. And then half a second later, your brain goes, well, hang on a minute. Surely the US is much bigger than Canada. And it's a phenomenal order of difference, the number of consumers that there are in the United States versus Canada. So that this really doesn't hold up much water. And there was no actual policy behind it. It was just calling on John Swinney to do something. It wasn't suggesting that we give money to Diageo, for example, to help them invest in alternative markets. And their consumption of Scotch whisky in Canada seems to be quite static, where there's an increase in the US. So there didn't seem to be an awful lot coming out. There seemed to be a lot of internal division. Could even teach the SNP something about infighting with this Glasgow group, and not very much emerging in terms of what they want to do going forward and where the kind of new policy ideas are going to come from.
Well, I had a wee Google while I was listening to you, and there's a headline in The Spectator, why Ross Greer would be good for the Scottish Green Party, which is kind of like a recommendation you need
on
a
the
hole in the head, right? But I would have thought the thing is, in the same way as you're saying, here's an issue, with zonal pricing, cheap energy for Scotland, not a squeak. Okay, from an independence-seeking party that's meant to protect Scottish interests. That's just wrong. with the Greens, anytime you're coming anywhere near something that's about renewables, a green future, and protecting the planet, remember that old one? Do we remember this old one? Because the Greens have now are very much in danger. I've just been following, just comments made by Ross and other candidates, Gillian and Lorna, and they get absolute pelters. I mean, total pelters. I've been at meetings where people, in rural areas still remember the Greens as the wine bar revolutionaries, as I think Fergus Ewing contemptuously labelled them. Now, there's not many things that Fergus Ewing has said that stick with, progressive types, to be fair. But that one about the wine bar revolutionaries and the HPMAs, which were just wildly unlikely to happen, asking coastal communities if they wanted to have no control whatsoever in their seas, not be able to go to swim, not be able to fish, and not get any compensation. And what did you think of that? There was no way that was ever going to pass. So there's been a building sort of, kind of contempt really for a lot of the stuff that the Greens have proposed, which they really need to tackle. I know that's hard, and I know they were basically, it's rolled over on top of by the UK government on the bottle bank scheme and everything, but that's still an issue, is the lack of credibility on green stuff, which is such a danger that if you guddle something when you make a move and you don't build in communities, just the same as the SNP's thing with the Highlands and the wind farms, they will come up and whack you in the face. So why are the Greens, who are meant to be all about communities, not championing that in a big way, for one thing, championing really climate stuff and getting back to some freaking sense of urgency about it? I don't hear a lot more about that, and a lot more courage about it, and a lot more just playing this one a straight bat on it. Because between the failed green measures and the emphasis on trans rights, a lot of people will now see the Greens as not kind of quite the feisty outliers on the issues it's the priorities. It's not, for a lot of people, it might not be that it's trans is in there. It's just, what's your priorities? And the priorities should be the business of the climate.
Totally. And I think there's just, a huge discontent and movement. I think if you think about that poll we were talking about last week about, does Keir Starmer, respect people like me? I think, the Greens, with their hyper focus on identity politics and move away from really grassroots issues and energy and climate matters, have, I think, alienated certainly a selection of their vote, and not much push on independence either. Certainly, we heard recently that this new Sultana party was going to be agnostic on independence. The Greens are not agnostic on independence, but they're not exactly, certainly of recent times, been full-throttled advocates for it either. So, where do yesers put their second vote come May next year is a big question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. Come on, everybody. Let's have something a bit more exciting out there in the public domain, methinks.
Absolutely. You touched on the Faroes, and I see there was some more chat about Shetland's possibility for tunnels and a move for the Shetland Islands Council to consult the Faroese.
Yes, and blimmin' about time. I mean, I think I wrote a column about that after a visit there 18 months ago. And actually, the game Islanders of Yell and Unst had formed a joint committee and themselves had visited the Faroes. So, I mean, fine that Shetland Council are now doing it, although I don't see why they can't just rubber stamp what the Islanders found, actually. But okay, maybe they need to go through the whole thing themselves. Again, another bit of a demonstration, even in a small council like Shetland, of a slightly top-down thing. But nonetheless, if the show's on the road, then that is unquestionably a good thing. So, and I'm sure everybody is probably still having a great time at the Island Games. A lot of people are sort of saying, why do we need Island Games? Why do Islanders have games against one another? And you think, Jesus, you've just never been to an island, have you? Because it's just, people map islands map one another. And actually, it's like, in that they're roughly same sized. I mean, not totally at all, but roughly, they're small. it means that you're not up against, a country the size of Scotland versus Orkney. I mean, I'll give you, back in the day, I can remember when the Klondike ships were in at Ullapool, the guys from behind the Iron Curtain used to play Ullapool. It used to be, I can't remember, it was kind of, the Iron Curtain versus the rest of the world. I mean, it was very funny. And actually, these guys didn't have proper football boots. So I can remember all the teams ended up playing in bare feet just to make it, fair. So there's that. But it's much more fun to have this regular contact between islands, because you exchange so much more, about how your islands work, basically, than just doing the sport. So it must be great crack to be in Orkney at the moment.
I mean, some of the coverage, I've not seen a huge amount, but it certainly looked extremely friendly and, great fun. And I loved this idea of them bringing the waters together. That was the kind of main ceremonial thing, this depositing of the burn water in this kind of ceremonial cup. But I mean, a bit like you were saying in Thrive, the islanders quoted here in the BBC, the advocates of the tunnel saying, we're not a remote backwater, we're an advanced economy constrained by poor infrastructure. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing, this a bit, as you were saying in Thrive, people from elsewhere look at this and think it's empty and barren, but in actual fact it's a thriving economy and there's lots of really interesting things going on, and it needs modern infrastructure to support it.
And whilst, from a Shetland perspective, you are closer to the Faroes than, probably the Scottish mainland. It's probably a bit even Stevens. So, that's how they're operating. And I would love to go up and have a look. I mean, I must stop thinking that there's a film to do in everything, but there nonetheless is, because their latest tunnel is the longest one yet. Has, I'm sure everyone's heard about this, but has an underwater roundabout that is now the largest underwater roundabout in the world. And since they realised they were having a bit of a famous first with that one, they commissioned an incredible artwork, which is around the roundabout.
Jellyfish?
Well, it's everything. It's all the stuff that is above you right now. I mean, I can imagine that could be a wee bit scary if you had any doubts about the workmanship in the tunnel. But still, it's everything that's above you. So it's kind of like, it's a celebration of the sea fundamentally. And it's a great thing to do. This is back to an era when Public Works did actually get top banana artwork commissioned. So just by the by, it's altogether a good thing. And they've already got evidence of how it's turned around depopulation on these islands. You'd have to throw in that those little islands also have their own councils for about 1,000 people. So you can, what would be great now, but will never happen, is for Shetland to start to kind of set up mini councils on all these islands, because they can start to make decisions that would basically start to, turn things around. There's one of the people that will be in the film that I make about the Highlands, I'm hoping, is Tom Wills, who has an energy consultancy and came to that Western Isles event and had one graph that was kind of mind-blowing. It was a picture of the massive Viking wind farm on Shetland, very controversial, and the tiny community-owned wind farm on the island of Yell at Garth. And the tiny Garth wind farm produces more community benefit than the massive Viking wind farm. So, when you get to that form, Yell could be, with its income from that, will be taking care of quite a lot of stuff actually, but it still needs it still needs the council to back its attempts to get a tunnel. I've got to say, having been there, they're so determined they'd almost build a blooming tunnel with their hands and knees. Actually, they're just determined to do it, and that's when you get to that level of autonomy in people's thinking. That's when they should have autonomy as a council.
Completely. And, that's what we need to see more of, this kind of community ownership and community involvement. And I hope that the Shetland stuff comes off and that they have sufficient legal powers to set up the borrowing and toll infrastructure in order to get it to happen. But of course, this could happen all over the place. There were other reports about kind of potential for a tunnel between Gourock and Dunoon, for example, and then over into the other side, linking up all these sorts of places down to Campbelltown, and making that whole Argyll Peninsula much more interconnected, and allowing people to move around more freely. So there's vast amount of scope for this to
absolutely. Totally. I mean, there was a time when there was a proposal called the Spinal Route for the whole of the Outer Hebrides, which was going to be mostly, well, a combination of bridges and tunnels. But I mean, the weather, what put paid to that was some terrible storms in which a whole family died trying to escape on a natural bit of a kind of land bridge. And so, people just looked at that and thought, my God, can you imagine if you were on some long 5-mile bridge or something in that kind of weather? And of course, that is one of the arguments for a tunnel. I know there's also geological stuff, that arguments that need to be had about this, but it feels like we never got that far with any of these things. It was just too much. And everywhere I go around the other countries, hardware is pretty much, in with the bricks. And it's the first thing you get from using your own energy money. And it then lets everything else, thrive because people are just using it to move forward. Whereas here, it's like, oh my God, we might get a new Calmac harbour in Loch Boisdale. And at the moment, I mean, when I came back from there, the ferry I took had been its departure time had changed 3 times. So, and the people were saying, this reminds me of the Four Yorkshiremen sketch. You were lucky. At least it actually left. So very often still there's cancellations from South Uist. Mull has still got problems. There's problems across the system, and it's paying, robbing Peter to play Paul at the moment on the ferries. But much as people are sort of just shrugging and going, this has become our new normal, for the whole of Scotland, having basically no kit is normal. It's like a whole nation, in the sense that we all used to play football by just putting jumpers on the ground for the goals. And actually, to be fair, there's not much wrong with that. It's like a country, Scotland, that's just got used to putting the jumpers down for the goals, on everything. And eventually that just kicks you back in the face because the rest of the world has kind of moved on.
Completely. Now, talking about borrowing powers, back to the UK, I see the Chancellor's having this massive boost for first-time buyers with mortgage reform and slashing of so-called red tape that was brought in after the financial crisis to prevent banks from, doing all their sort of casino banking and to separate their retail and their investment bank structure. This is the Leeds reforms, which could supposedly add somewhere in the region of additional 36,000 mortgages, but we're already seeing an increase in repossessions and an increase in defaults, up I think 31% in Q1 of 2024. So I'm not sure this necessarily is good news for the UK in the long term.
Well, indeed. I mean, it's interesting that Rachel Reeves and I think Keir Starmer have ponied up to Leeds to announce this because there's the other part of the mortgage. There's the mortgages thing, which is, but there's the banks thing, which is, I mean, she was the one who last year when they come in decided to keep this, the bonus cap on bankers, which had been scrapped by the Tories. Everyone expected Labour would reintroduce a cap on bonuses, but she decided no, they would keep the cap gone, if you like, keep it scrapped. And, everyone just chants that one off. What it did was it limited the bonus you could get to a maximum of 2 times your base salary. And just think about that for a moment. If I had time, I would have Googled the average salary to a senior staff member in a bank in the City of London. And, everyone was moaning because they could only have 2 times that as a bonus. That's in addition to your salary. So it's always worth just remembering what the level of kind of what the... So anyway, they ponied up to Leeds to make this not look like a big benefit for the city, because and here's another thing that should be hitting everybody who's of an independence bent between the eyes. Because the Leeds kind of conurbation is the second biggest financial services area in Britain, and it should be Edinburgh.
Or Glasgow, or both.
Well, it was Edinburgh for
Yeah.
quite a long time, actually. But, you know, and it's as if we've just disappeared out of the equation completely. So anyway, they were up to Leeds to sort of announce this. And tonight you'll see this on the news, doubtless, because she's got a Mansion House address to city bosses in London. So whipping back down the road, which will kind of go through all of this in more detail, doubtless. But there's an awful lot of people worrying about the sort of essentially bonfire of financial regulations. That kind of idea, which she insists will help to kind of unleash UK growth and eventually ensure households are better off. Oh dear, everyone, can you hear that little
Oh, I think she's actually used the trickle down phrase.
She even said it, right, which is kind of like, God almighty, I think most of us have really had enough of that. But even if it's just uneducated punters like us, there's quite a few folk who are already ponying it. I stopped going to do this ponying in thing. Anyway, lurching in. There's a guy, Chaitanya Kumar, who's the head of the New Economics Foundation, and he's saying this is Groundhog Day. We've been here before, expecting the financial sector to do heavy lifting in terms of growth, and pointing out just what you were saying, the 2008 crash and what followed should be a very strong lesson in not letting the financial services sector off the leash. But that's what we seem to be doing. And just by the by, he doesn't see any evidence that deregulating the financial services sector creates growth. And there's another, Jessie Griffiths, who's from the Financial Innovation Lab. She says it's clear that prioritising the needs of international finance over domestic needs simply won't work for the UK economy. So, okay, you know, great, knock yourself out. But this is a weird old time when, I mean, this is all the stuff you could have expected from the Tories. And then when you actually look for a critique, I mean, this is the next important thing, it seems to me at the moment, is when you look for a critique of the kind of gumming problems around from a vaguely right-wing capitalisty kind of corporate bent that's going on at the moment by Labour, you know, people, especially the BBC, automatically look to Her Majesty's opposition, the Tories, who are hardly coming in with a kind of like wholesome critique of it. Sometimes they're just a bit muzzled because it's the kind of stuff they would have done. And their quote on this one so far is, "This demonstrates the chaos of the Labour government." Yeah, that's a real searing critique, that one, you know. Just by the by and slightly wafting across, Ed Miliband was on Channel 4 News and being interviewed by Krishnan Gurumurthy. And because reform is sitting in the back of everyone's minds now and the front of every opinion poll, instead of putting Ed Miliband through his paces on zonal pricing, continuing dependence on gas, exorbitant price of nuclear power stations, all that kind of stuff, the interview was almost going back to, you know, the suggestion to Ed Miliband that there really isn't a climate crisis because reform says there isn't and net zero isn't an objective worth pursuing. Now, I know reform is saying that, but I mean, this is how our whole debate is being hijacked now because the sort of reasonable people in the middle of the room who might want a sort of intelligent debate about stuff are now being so outflanked by right-wing, insert the noun that you want, type both,
dot, dot, dot.
you know, dot, dot, dots, that you basically end up having an absolutely infantilized debate. And that brings me back to why Scotland needs to freaking lift its game, because you're not going to hear any progressive way out of anything south of the border because you've got a kind of muzzled Labour captured by corporate interests, a Tory party that's got its eye again on reform and is just trying to second guess, a set of people who know that the easiest way for them to pick up votes, especially in Scotland where their racist crap doesn't work, is to go for the net zero thing and basically imply it's a completely pointless thing we don't need to do. We do need to do it, but we need to do it with community benefit in it.
I mean, you could hardly believe that we're back here. I mean, it's almost kind of like back to the kind of 90s of, you know, this is climate change is a hoax type stuff. We've got Trump in the US, drill baby drill, and for some reason we're listening to reform just because they're, you know, looking tasty in the polls. But
actually, there was another thing I'm remembering that, I mean, there's a, you know, if we were in the EU, there'd be a whole bit of your brain that would actually have to be taking in the constant melee there is actually in European politics. But a group called the Patriotic Group actually took charge, a bit of a wee pincer move in some committee, and they are total climate skeptics, and they are apparently, nominally, unless somebody fixed them last week, they are in charge of prosecuting the EU's campaign on net zero, which is they don't believe in it. So all around, there are people that just think this doesn't work for anyone, it's not worth the candle. And yeah, I mean, here we are. And then cheerfully, you see the next item on the news is that we've had the warmest May on record, the second or third warmest June. How many people are predicted to die in a kind of, in the heat wave that has slightly stopped, thank God, and there's been some rain. I mean, you just feel like you would love to just have some big old bruisers out there that would just start telling things a bit like it is and stop looking over their shoulder, because that every time that you turn around to see what the kind of nihilists are up to and try to pull their argument into your own, you just shred it.
Completely. And of course, we also saw water problems for Scottish whisky industry. They're reducing the level of extraction and bringing forward planned maintenance last week in order to avoid some of the potential drought situations even here in Scotland.
Yep.
So,
yes.
We're going to have to move to higher spending on water infrastructure in order to capture the water when it does come. Huge amounts of additional heavy rain over the kind of autumn, winter and spring periods for longer periods of dry summers.
Yep, that is about the size of it.
And just back to the Rachel Reeves stuff, I mean, there's nothing really about what was actually going to happen to UK house prices, but this is potentially going to just encourage additional borrowing and house price inflation. The Prudential Regulation Authority has been told that it can now allow loan to value ratios of 4.5 times a buyer's income, pushing up the amount of money that people can borrow, and which will no doubt inflate house prices. I mean, I just looked at the market here locally, and house prices here have gone up 30% since we bought our house in 2017. And you think, for why? You're not getting any better of a product. It's no bigger, larger, more luxurious. Our homes in the UK and Scotland particularly are pretty average. Apart from the kind of recent crop of new builds, most of them are very inefficient and by no means luxurious for the amount of money that we shell out for them.
Yep, all of that. So we'll wait to see how that unravels.
Yes.
Because you get the feeling that, the other thing is the press, I think the media down south they just don't, they sense fear. They sense weakness in Starmer and Reeves. And actually, I think they don't particularly like them. There's also their own corporate interests are going on. So in a way, not for great reasons, there will probably be a lot of scepticism about anything that she comes up with now. Still, we'll see what happens.
Indeed. And in other news, King Charles has scheduled the Trump state visit, but it's not going to be anywhere you're going to be able to protest it.
Yes, the state visit, but the state visit's the 17th or 19th of September or something.
Yes, and it's have a cheeky Scottish visit beforehand, which is going to cost Police Scotland a fortune.
Yeah, and it's not quite clear, but it seems to be the end of July, which is kind of, the next 2 weeks, actually. And so he's got his 2 courses in Ayrshire and Aberdeenshire, on which apparently he will visit. And that's the 5,000 police officers.
Yeah.
Seems that both Swinney and Starmer will meet him. Because it's not an official visit, Starmer will not have, you probably know the proper word for it, but there won't be a minuted meeting, So it's not a proper meeting.
I'll be back to sofa government. We'll just have a quick catch up over a cup of coffee.
So, none of what's discussed, therefore, needs to hit the public domain in any way. So it'll, who knows what they'll end up talking about. You do got to wonder, though, about Swinney still. I mean, I know I may be a bit naive and hardline or whatever, but Jesus. I mean, it's only March since Swinney said a Trump state visit to the UK could only go ahead if it helps solidify US support for Ukraine. Now, actually, it does look on the face of it as if Trump has actually begun to finally notice what everybody else in the freaking world had noticed about Putin, and is now beginning to sort of switch although if you note what's happening, they're selling the Patriot missile
we're
system.
going to pay for it 100%, allegedly.
So it's like we've already got a £48 billion increase in defence spending before this, announced about 3 weeks ago by Keir Starmer, which everyone just went, yeah, fine, 2.5 times the black hole. And now we're going to contribute our whack, presumably, to the European kitty that pays for the Americans to keep their defence spending and technology and everything up to whack, and looking like the big generous guys when they aren't actually. They're just getting a sale to the Europeans to hand to the Ukraine.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, okay, fine. I suppose in the end, it's a desperate situation, and I sort of feel guilty and sorry for the Ukrainians that because the whole horror of Palestine has hit centre stage over the period that they have been quietly struggling away, we have probably lost, a sense of where that whole thing's at. But at least at the moment, it looks like Zelensky and Trump are kind of on the same page. But of course, next week, who knows?
Yeah, and in other military news, did you see just announced today that there was some massive leak of Afghan details of Afghan workers who'd been working for the UK government during the period of occupation in Afghanistan, which has been covered up with some kind of enormous super injunction. The first time the UK government itself has had a super injunction. So a data set of somewhere in the region of 33,000 records that was accidentally emailed by MOD official to the wrong person and has been circulating around subsequently, and they're expecting to be sued at a cost of up to £250 million, and £7 billion of taxpayers' money has been earmarked to handle the fallout.
Wow, I saw that headline, but just didn't have time to read it. Who was that? The last Tory government that was responsible for that?
Yes, I mean, this is in addition. If you remember when we pulled out of Kandahar, there was all this stuff lying around, all the paperwork that had been mishandled, that had been left when they bugged out of their office, which was a huge scandal. And I remember drafting stuff to the Information Commissioner on behalf of Joanna to complain about that, and they came back with a very kind of, well, this was unfortunate, but it's out with the UK and we're not that bothered. Just putting vast numbers of people at risk by totally unbelievably careless handling of data and storing all of this information together on things like databases that could be emailed around. Just beggars belief. I had some slight involvement in these sorts of things. I remember when we were looking at the potential evacuation of the female Afghan judges. There was a data set of Afghan judges that had been put together, which I held and wanted to give to Foreign Office officials. And they said, well, you can email it across to me. I said, well, no, I can't email it to you. I'm not on the government secure email infrastructure. I said, we can encrypt it if you tell me what I need to install and what level of encryption here. Oh, we don't have anything like that. Could you burn it onto a CD? I said, no, I couldn't burn it onto a CD. I don't even have a computer that takes a CD, never mind one that can burn one, for goodness sake, 20 years later. You could put it on a thumb drive and I can meet you, halfway down Whitehall and can hand it over like some kind of dead letter drop. I was just amazed by the kind of lack of data security and infrastructure that there was at the Foreign Office. It was just simply staggering.
God. But I mean, is the people who have been abandoned, though, and are still stuck in Afghanistan, it's not going to benefit them at all, is it?
It's very. I think there had to be an additional evacuation to take some of the worst people out. They didn't tell anybody because they just covered all of that up. And they're now saying that it's been such a long time that maybe the Taliban are not that bothered about killing the people that are on the list anyway. Which I hate my doots. I don't think the Taliban are the type of people that give up and move on, and we're all pals now, and that's not a problem. I think if you got access to that level of information, you can bet they would put some use to it. But they're saying there's 18,500 Afghanis, which is less than a fifth of those caught up in the breach, have been flown to the UK and put up in hotels and military bases, and other people have have basically been left.
Well, I mean, there's also the ongoing just awfulness of the situation in Gaza, which it's. I don't know if it's just that thing where when it's something that you're quite close to yourself, you seem to think it's beginning to sprout arms and legs now in terms of the number of different bits of international society that are basically saying this is now enough. We've got to do something. I don't know if people have noticed there's going to be actually today. There's a conference in Colombia with South Africa, Brazil, Norway, Ireland, Portugal, Spain, and Slovenia in attendance to try to find a way to basically pull together a massive increase in sanctions on Israel. It's a group called the Hague Group that was launched in the Netherlands in January that just wants to stop the genocide and is able to use those words, which obviously singles them out from quite other countries like ours. And sort of at the same time, the news is that actually there's a bunch of Labour politicians had a foreign trip funded by, Pat's dearest friends, Labour Friends of Israel, who took an all expenses paid group out in May. And they posed for a photo with Isaac Herzog, who is the Israeli president, who said shortly, way after the Hamas attack, he said an entire nation out there is responsible about the beginnings of the process and the killing in Palestine. So they also met Yair Golan, who the name that will probably mean something to people now, who's the IDF major. And at the same time, it's just, the killings go on. There were 6 children killed for collecting water at a humanitarian aid point. I don't know if that was yesterday. Every day it's another 20, 30. I mean, it's just obscene that these numbers keep clocking up. And now, there's no basic response. We talked last week about this fucking crazy idea about having a concentration camp basically in Rafah. And absolute fair play to Helena Kennedy, who was on the Today programme or one of the BBC sequence programmes, who actually just talked about it as a concentration camp. And she was questioned on that by the presenter, who said, you use the words concentration camp. Do you actually mean that? And Helena Kennedy says, yes, because we're witnessing starvation at the moment. And that's what happens in a concentration camp. People are starved to death. So, there's people who, obviously no slouch, director of the International Bar Association's Human Rights Institute, Helena Kennedy, basically now just walking straight in, being able to talk about concentration camps, genocide. And of course, meanwhile, arrests are happening for people connected to Palestine Action. This is surreal, but everyone I hope is remembering there's a demonstration this weekend, July the 19th. It starts at 1 p.m. from the foot of the Mound. I'll be there. Hope lots of people who've got time will be there, because there's no point frothing and getting hot under your collar about this. If you can get your bahookie there, just get there. But that group had somebody wearing a T-shirt that didn't actually say Palestine Action. I wish I had it in front of me, but it had the word Palestine at the top, then some other words, and then sort of take, and then big and bold action. So the 2 words that would stand out were Palestine Action, but there was a lot else in between. Anyway, a person was blimmin' lifted for wearing that, had his T-shirt taken off him, and was charged with something in Glasgow, which is kind of weird. And people think, well, that's just one person. Well, all over the country, people have been wearing Palestine Action T-shirts. I'm seeing there's a kind of feed of information that comes in from a group that's monitoring all of this stuff. So they're talking about surreal repression in Cardiff, where the police kind of went fairly bonkers to, there was 13 sign holders held in police custody for 24 hours for holding signs that said Palestine in Action. The homes of those sign holders were raided, with posters, books and technology seized, and broken down front doors left open. 2 of the 13 were Quakers aged 78 and 80, and it was reported that their food cupboards had been tested for radioactive material.
insane. But I mean, that's what I was saying a couple of weeks
insane.
ago. This is how they get you. Or you're standing next to the wrong type of flag, you've got the wrong type of badge on, or that, you don't have to have the intent to encourage support for Palestine action if you can be deemed to be anywhere around the outside of it. You're fair game for being arrested. This is a really broad-based power, and pretty much get anybody.
Well, they might be getting me, actually, at the weekend, because if anyone gives me one of those T-shirts, I'll have them on. This has just got utterly ridiculous, so you might have to find someone else to do the podcast next week. But, I mean, this is utterly ridiculous. And, everybody needs to decide where they are on this. Again, the First Minister should be saying something about this, because this is the beginnings of a police state. Well, it's not even the beginnings of it. When I think back to, do you remember when Rishi Sunak, was it Rishi Sunak that was in charge? There was such a sequence of bits of lettuce and everything else. But still, do you remember when the police in London were basically running behind like cavalcades, clearing streets and having a sort of running cavalcade at the side of them? Do you remember that?
No, can't remember that particularly. I mean, remember we had new protest laws about things that were, too noisy. And that was going to push you over the threshold of getting huckled off and arrested. There's huge crackdowns by the last Conservative government on the right to protest. And Labour seem to be just, filling their boots as well.
But the other thing that I've got to say, this was the one that just made steam come out of my ears, was there must have been some debate in the House going on with David Lammy.
Well, I think he was at committee this when he said it was a sticking point. You what?
If people didn't get this, I mean, what he's quoted, and I'm actually going to quote him now, because just listen to the lack of any kind of desire to say something in this. So Lammy says, the statements that you've just described from Defence Minister Israel Katz relate very much to where the IDF are located. This is the one about having a concentration camp. And you'll understand that if that's what you describe is true, then I think that would be a big sticking point for getting a ceasefire. And then he goes on to say that, this question of where Israel's location is, he says, I suspect the statement from Defence Minister Katz is in relation to that. And I suspect if indeed he is insistent of that position, then it would be very hard to see how we get that ceasefire, because there is an acute discussion about the degree to which the IDF withdraws from Gaza. What the actual...
I mean, that's like Sir Humphrey level of impenetrable. These guys are creating a concentration camp. People queuing up for water are being shot. The Israeli army, I think yesterday or the day before, admitted that they had accidentally killed 6 people in an air raid queuing for water. And that's just the ones that they apologise for. It's just insane.
But it's the dead giveaways there. That use of the kind of a sticking point. I mean, I don't know. Does this guy just not watch the same news as the rest of us? Because it's so crass that, and buried deep in this, however, is the notion that getting a ceasefire is all that they're about. And of course, that's important. But I mean, what it hints at is that, to get any kind of ceasefire out of the Israelis, you've got to let them have what they really want. And what they're doing is positioning themselves within Gaza to then be able to withdraw, because that's the kind of deal required of them. So they need to basically herd everyone into a concentration camp so that when they withdraw, they can be confident that nobody is basically going to escape. I mean, that's what I would take from that. Where's I don't know what I didn't look at the whole committee, discussion on it. But I mean, where's anybody coming crashing at 100 miles an hour on this sort of horrible rubbish?
Well, yeah, other than Macron calling for, immediate recognition of a Palestinian state, we're really not seeing any proper action from the UK government. We're just kind of chewing the cud and letting the Israeli government do exactly what it wants for as long as it wishes to.
Well, at least, there should be some headlines from this group that's meeting in Colombia. But, people will scan those countries and think, well, it's not any of the big boys. And this is always the way it is. If it's not got the big heavyweights in it, then it looks like it's just a bunch of irrelevant also-rans. And yet, there will be enough people joining this. That has now doubled in size since March, that group of nations that are willing to do something. There's got to be some action. And actually, the date, July the 19th, that's this Saturday, isn't it? There's a big rally in London as well. So London and Edinburgh are having two big rallies. That's not going to, okay, I'm not being naive, but what else can you do than pitch up and oppose this?
And again, we'll have the details of that in the show notes so that people can find out where it's going to be and where the meeting point will be. And I think we're kind of coming up to the hour there. We've, despite my sojourn in Greece, managed to cover quite a lot of current happenings. And
impressively, in fact, worryingly for your sanity. So,
well, when you're sitting by the pool, you've got to do something. Although I said we had a lot of breaks for marching around. In fact, I went off on my own into Rhodes and into the old town and looked at various Byzantine churches and what have you, so much so that I ended up sort of straining my hamstrings and had to spend the following day kind of sort of stretching and swimming in the pool to try and get the old calves back in working operational order.
Not at your age. I had to go off to a blooming excellent physiotherapist. As I was sort of lying face down and said, yeah, I think it's just your small muscles are not working. Since everything else seems to be pretty good. Will we just give you some acupuncture? And I thought, well, I'm not in much of a position to argue, So I said, well, yeah, okay. He says, we'll just crank it up, obviously, onto the electric. So, okay. So,
just zap you. That'll be fine. Lie there. Relax.
Well, but, obviously this is what it's meant to be about. And when he showed me the pins they put in at the end, geez, they were much longer than I expected. But, and each time one went in and he wibbled it, I kind of just about jumped through the roof. And he was saying, good, because this is what you're trying to activate trigger points. So you've got to just kind of woman up a little bit and think, for the greater good. But my God, did it clear everything up. And they gave me some exercises. Seriously, if this is into my life, these exercises, I'm doing them. And it just has made such a difference. So, yeah.
On that electrifying note, we will not see you next week, chums, because Lesley's off, but we will have the culture special available to everybody, which has been getting some really cracking feedback with a number of nice emails from subscribers saying what an absolute barnstorming episode it was. And remember, of course, you can subscribe by going onto the Lesley Riddoch website at lesleyriddoch.com/podcast, where there's all the details on how to subscribe to support the podcast. So that will be coming to you next week on Tuesday the 22nd, and we'll be back on the 29th, and we'll see you then.